You're listening to A Radio.
We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender.
Two ways in which any government can proceed. One is a way based on what you and I would call a free society, which is enshrined right at the heart of the American Constitution. The other one is a way which allows only one view, both of economics and politics, in which almost everything is either owned or controlled by the state, including the media, including the ideas, including freedom of discussion and everything. There is no freedom of discussion. Now, between those two ways, the free society and the totally controlled society, there are, of course, variations. I think what we've learned in Britain is that we've gradually, over the last certainly 12 or 13 years, with perhaps a little interruption, gone slowly further and further away from the free society towards something else. At the same time, we've found, I don't find it strange, but some other people do, that we have stopped creating wealth. We've had a large number of increasing restrictions, and you've been finding two things. First, that we are more and more concentrating on redistributing the wealth we've got, rather than creating any more. To create more, you need a slightly freer society, and you need an incentive society. Naturally, when I see that happening, I look with very great alarm to societies which have gone even further left. That is, they've tried to redistribute even more and haven't had the incentives for people working hard on their own account, doing well for their families, and often then being able to create jobs for others. They've produced a much more prosperous society than we have.
Welcome to this very special morning moment. I've been thinking about this morning moment for some considerable time. I wanted to make this memorable, almost an index on our world. I thought hard about talking about the future as I see it for Canada and the US. But then I thought that would be too simple, perhaps even too obvious. But that doesn't mean I won't be returning to this very soon. Now, I wanted to cast my net a little wider. I have decided to look at an area of the world that we do know, and we do know quite a bit about, but never talk much about it. It's Russia. Why Russia? It's not because of those Looney Tunes in the US. No, it's far more serious than that. At this time, I want to make reference to someone with which I wouldn't be here, but for his doing. This guy is a silent giant in the podcast world. His name is Hutch Bailey Jr. of Cold War Radio fame. If you haven't tuned in to his podcasts, you need to, because it could change your life. It did mine. It certainly opened my eyes. Thanks, Hutch. I really appreciate that. Now to the matter in hand. Reference, basically, The World at War. This is a piece from the World at War TV series. I constantly reference this particular documentary because I think it's paramount in understanding our world history and what one possible future could be. And as someone once said, I think it was Sir Winston Churchill, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat that. It's so true. With that in mind, I want to play you a clip from the ITV's World at War show. It's a documentary, as I said, and the piece I've entitled it as The Sudetenland.
The troops rode over the Rhine bridges at dawn on March the 7th, 1936. Secretly, the commanders were ready to bolt back across the river if France showed any sign of fight. But there was none. The Rhineland city of Cologne and all Germany went wild with relief and delight. A part of German honor had been recovered. Hitler had taken a chance and won.
Now I play these clips for one reason and one reason only. There is no evidence of what I'm about to say, but consider this. Consider this. Substitute Hitler for Putin. Now that sounds a little far-fetched, but bear with me. Hitler was considered at the time by many European countries as nothing more than a minor nuisance. Nothing more than a minor nuisance. Think about that. They felt they had the power, if needed, to control him. Putin, in my mind, is in a very similar place. The former Soviet Union has been, in their eyes, i.e. the West, defeated. In Russian eyes, they see it very, very differently indeed. Putin has always believed in the rebuilding of the Soviet Empire, but unlike the previous regime, he prefers the Hitler tactics. What do I mean by that? Slowly, slowly, slowly. I give you the following examples. This piece, The State of Georgia, from CBS.
Now to the fighting between Russia and Georgia over the Georgian breakaway region of South Ossetia. President Bush has told Russian leaders that military action against Georgia is unacceptable. Vice President Cheney said Russia's invasion must not go unanswered. Alex Rossi of Sky News has the latest developments from Georgia. Alex, you're in Gori, near the border with South Ossetia. What is the situation there now?
Well, there are a few people still here in Gori, but most of the people have already left, fleeing the fighting. There are some very, very frightened people here, and as is usually the case in conflict zones, the people that remain are mostly the elderly, the people who are most vulnerable. Now, this city, we're told by residents, took another hit this morning. Over there's a military installation. Now, that was whacked again by Russian fighter jets. And, of course, the bomb blasts again went into civilian areas. And
Now, the Russian assault on Georgia, quote, the Russo-Georgian War was a war between Georgia and Russia and the Russian-backed self-proclaimed republics of South Ossetia and some other unpronounceable name, Abkhazia. The war took place in 2008, following a period of worsening relations between Russia and Georgia, both formerly constituent republics of the Soviet Union. So in 2008, he has attacked successfully and taken land back that did not belong to Russia. What did we do? Nothing. We did nothing. The same as Hitler. Next, 2014, Ukraine. This is a piece from CNN. Full-scale invasion of Russia underway.
Amateur video shows alleged Russian battle tanks moving into southern Ukraine. In the last 24 hours, up to 1,000 Russian troops with heavy weapons moved into the area, according to U.S. military intelligence.
Russia has deliberately and repeatedly violated the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. And the new images of Russian forces inside Ukraine make that plain for the world to see.
Moving from Rostov, Russia, the 1,000 troops crossed into southern Ukraine, moving to the city of Mariupol. This opens up a third front in fighting beyond the other 1,000 Russian troops already in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions.
But what was their goal? Clearly now, we know. I for one believe that the analysts could see it. They could see Putin's endgame, but they couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that Putin was going to invade Ukraine. They couldn't believe that he would just take parts of it. But that wasn't the plan. No. He had a bigger plan, didn't he? The Crimea, the gateway to control the Black Sea, where Putin has a large naval force. If any of you are fans of the TV series BBC Top Gear, you will have seen inside those so-called secret bases at the time and known that they were launch bays for his nuclear submarines during the era of the Soviet Union. So that brings me back to the Crimea itself. This piece is from foreignaffairs.com. Why did Putin take the Crimea? Understanding his motives for occupying and annexing Crimea is crucial to assessing whether he will make similar choices in the future. For example, sending troops to liberate ethnic Russians in the Baltic states, just as it is key to determining what measures the West might take to deter such actions. 3 plausible interpretations of Putin's move have emerged. The first, call it Putin as a defender, is that the Crimea operation response to the threat of NATO's further expansion along Russia's western border? By this logic, Putin sees the peninsula to prevent two dangerous possibilities. First, the Ukraine new government might join NATO, and second, that Kiev might evict Russia's Black Sea fleet from its long-standing base at Sevastopol. A second interpretation, call it Putin as an imperialist, casts the annexation of the Crimea as part of Russia's project to gradually recapture the former territories of the Soviet Union. Putin never accepted the loss of the Russian prestige that followed the end of the Cold War. This argument suggests that he is determined to restore it, in part by expanding Russia's borders. Third, Putin, as improviser, rejects such broader designs and presents an annexation as a hastily conceived response to the unforeseen fall of Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. The occupation of the annexation of Crimea, in this view, was an impulsive decision that Putin stumbled into rather than a careful move of a strategist with the geopolitical ambitions. And the piece continues. So where are we today? Look at the maps. Look at the maps of Europe. Germany, a complete basket case economically now, due to their open borders policy. The collapse of the EU, Britain in turmoil, the rise again of socialism, Germany and most of the EU reliant on Russian gas for energy, the demand by leftists to exit from using so-called fossil fuels. All of this together with an ever-increasing demand by socialist-driven agendas that demand the reduction in the funding of defence and of nation-states to fund the ever-increasing social welfare society, where citizens are demanding more and more free services. This, beyond anything else, opens up to what Putin sees as not only a weak Western Europe and UK, and by the way, the UK doesn't even have a single aircraft carrier to defend itself from any foreign incursion, but Western countries in general, and in particular that of one nation that has been there to defend it. You know what I'm talking about. And their way of life since World War II. Now Putin sees his chance to turn the screws and force their hands. What will it be? Food, heat, energy, to live your lives as you choose? Well, it's going to cost you. Look at the map of Europe. I can't do it justice in audio form only, but take a look at the map of Europe and include Russia in that. And ask yourself this question. How much do you want peace? Are you prepared to give up Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, Macedonia, Albania, Montenegro, Serbia, and the list goes on and on and on.
Hitler kept Europe bewildered. Proclaiming Versailles extinct, he proposed a limit on armaments. Britain, the first democracy to make a pact with the Nazis, signed a naval agreement. Hitler was reassured. It might be safe to start tampering with the hated frontiers.
Is Serbia the place you would stop them? That's ironic, because, well, when you think about it, now we've come full circle. Well, nearly, because the adjoining state, in particular, if anyone remembers what happened there on June the 28th, 1914, well, I'll tell you, it was the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, who was the heir to the throne of the Austro-German Empire. And with a long twist, that started World War I. Now, if you look back, you will find that history, quite frankly, has blurred the reason for that war, that is World War I, other than to say strong military forces on both sides, etc., etc. But that's not the case now in the 21st century. It rather mirrors that of a pre-war, that is World War II, where, in Europe's case, a very weakened military allowed for an adventurous leader of a once strong and, in historic terms, a proud nation to flex its muscles, so to speak, expecting, as he did. Hitler, prior to the outbreak of World War II, the West was weak and had no stomach for armed conflict. Enforcing this notion by uncovering newer and newer sophisticated weapons that would enforce this notion, we come back to the present day. This really does closely parallel, in an uncanny fashion, what's going on right now with Putin, super weapons that he's introducing, And don't forget China in that. The parallels are just too frightening to ignore. While the West is tinkering around with social engineering and social justice, Putin and others are getting ready to pounce. And I haven't even really mentioned what Russia's up to in Syria, have I? Finally, I just have to mention in passing, as I did just a moment ago in more detail, China. Why China? Well, all I'll say about China is substitute China for Japan pre-World War II. And what do you have? A perfect storm. An attack on the east, an attack on the west. If we fail to see the unmistakable signs, then that is our folly and our folly alone. Putin is a real and present danger, and I believe he is getting ready to attack the West, and in particular Western Europe. I ask you, what price freedom? Will we stand back and watch him walk into the quote-unquote Sudetenland? Remember history. If we don't stand up to this bully and others, he and they will be knocking loudly on our door very, very soon, and we can no longer rely on just being in North America. We cannot stand aloof from Europe and think what happens there matters not to us. We can no longer stand behind our mighty oceans for protection. We are just moments away from disaster. So any hesitation at all on anyone's part could and would be catastrophic. Now, I wanted to do this piece for this special podcast because I believe the West in general stands on the edge of a precipice of what could in fact be a very bright future indeed. However, on the other side of that, well, I'll leave you to consider that. Remember, the cost of inaction is often greater than action. The parallels in history are unmistakable for those who are open to looking for them. And for those who choose to look the other way, then history can only answer that question. Finally, and this is as important as what I was talking about, I want to thank in particular two people that have been stalwart supporters of me from the very beginning. One is G. Ozzy, and the other is Daniel. Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate that. And also Hutch Bailey Jr. for getting me started in the first place. Well, all that remains for me to say is thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. And until our next morning moment, which will be somewhat shorter, well, goodbye and thank you.